Hello, students. Welcome again to another of our series of the Escape from Reason lecture series for Humanities 231 and 232. We want to pick up where we left off last time. You'll recall that we've been going through these very powerful tools which are a part of what we call the laws of logic or the principles of sound reason. Very powerful tools for you to use not only in writing your paper, but in life in general. And so we're going to proceed on here in just a moment. Here they are, the laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, the law of causality, the basic reliability of sense perception, and the analogical use of language. Now, having covered all four of these principles, you might be wondering, why is there a lecture 6 and 7? Well, we want to apply some of these things that we've learned, and we're going to do that today by looking at some confusion that surrounds these three terms: contradiction, paradox, and mystery. There's a difference between all three, and the problem is that these get conflated or confused in definitions with people, and so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen with us. So let's begin by looking at the source of some of this confusion. You'll recall, if we review the law of non-contradiction, it states A cannot be non-A. A simply standing for anything that we want to insert there. So for instance, if I have a pen in my pocket, that pen, if we want to substitute that for A, and I'm talking about a writing pen, of course, it can't be a pen and not a pen at the same time and in the same way and in the same relationship. Now, we've talked about the fact that, for instance, I can be both a son and a father at the same time. And up until a few years ago, when my mother passed away, I could certainly say that. I was a son to my mother, and I'm a father to both my grown children. But I can't be that in the same relationship. I can be that at the same time, but not in the same way and in the same relationship. For instance, I can't be both a father and a son at the same time, and in the same way and in the same relationship with my son, Stephen. Now, a paradox sometimes is confused with a contradiction. A paradox is from, if we dissect the word here, the first part of it, para, is from the Greek near or alongside, something that is near or alongside something else. So say, for instance, you probably heard the term paralegal or paramedic, certainly. Well, those are people who work near or alongside. Paralegal would be they work alongside lawyers, other legal specialists, and paramedic, people who work alongside doctors and nurses and things of this nature. You may be familiar with the term parable. Jesus spoke many times in parables, and you know that parables were little stories that Jesus would bring in alongside his teaching in order to illustrate a point, and teachers do that even to this day. The second part of the word, dox, comes from the Greek word dokein, and it means to seem or appear. So near, alongside, and to seem to appear. So a paradox, we're talking about this within the context of a contradiction here. A paradox seems to be a contradiction when placed alongside something. And so it would look like it's a contradiction, but upon further examination, we find that it's not. So let's give an example here. We mentioned the teachings of Jesus just a while ago. Jesus said, "The first shall be last." He also said, among many other things, "Whoever finds his life will lose it." Well, now, taken at face value, don't both of these seem to be a paradox? we would have every right to ask Jesus, what are you talking about? The first shall be last. If you're last, you certainly can't be first. And if you're first, you're certainly not be last. You can't be last. Those are opposites of each other. Same thing with here. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Well, if you find your life, that means you certainly haven't lost it. And if you lose it, you certainly haven't found it. And so what we find here is that these are paradoxical teachings. They're meant to get your attention because they seem to be a contradiction. But if we further examine them, then of course we find that when Jesus said the first shall be last, he's talking about there are some who are first now, who at a later time will find themselves to be last. And there are those last in this life that we're living right now, who in a new heaven and a new earth may find themselves to be first. And so we have to contextualize these things. We have to examine them and see exactly what's being referred to here. The same way here. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Well, what do you mean there, Jesus? Well, it means that whoever finds a new way of life will lose the old way of life, a way of life that you should want to lose anyway, because it's just not a good life. And so those who find new life in Christ that results in a restored, redeemed relationship with God and ends up in what the Bible calls eternal life will lose their old life, which is not eternal life, and you'll gain eternal life, which is a much better kind of life. So this basically explains the difference between a paradox and a contradiction. A paradox seems like a contradiction, but upon further examination, it's actually not. Now, I'd love to have the time here to talk about movies like Back to the Future. Those are classic paradox movies. You know, he goes back in time and he changes it, but then if he changes it, then what happened to the life that was there? And so it seems to contradiction. Well, any rate, you can Google paradox Back to the Future movies. There's a wealth of information out there. So what we want to remember then is since a paradox can make sense, a paradox is certainly not a contradiction because a contradiction defines the limits of intelligible speech. In other words, a contradiction is not anything that can be understood. A contradiction is unintelligible. It just doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is that it never can make sense. A contradiction, as we've talked about, is something like a married bachelor. Well, there can never be any such thing as a married bachelor because they contradict each other. There can never be any such thing as a round square because by its very definition, a square has four sides and it has points, therefore it can't be round. In the same way, that old riddle that people used to use for people who believe in God to say that, you know, the concept of God is a contradiction. Say, well, can God make a rock that he can't lift? And so if you say no, well, there's something God can't do, so therefore God's not all powerful. If he can lift it, then that means he can't make a rock that he can't lift, and so therefore there's something, once again, that God can't do. So this is just a clever play on words here, though, because it's actually the idea of God making a rock that he can't lift is a contradiction in terms. By definition, there is no such thing as a rock that God can't lift. Let's examine this statement. Once again, unfortunately, contradictions and irrational thought has invaded even the scientific community and places in academia where there are very, very smart people. So notice here, Douglas Rushkoff, an American media theorist, writer, columnist, lecturer, graphic novelist, and documentarian. Very, very smart person. But Mr. Rushkoff has drifted into irrationality here. Notice what he says. Our existence, talking about you and I, our existence may be unintentional, meaningless, and purposeless, but that doesn't preclude meaning or purpose from emerging as a result of our interaction and collaboration. Now, that may sound good, but what Mr. Rushkoff is saying here, that even though, because apparently he believes in the idea that the universe happened by chance, and that everything that exists is just as a result of mindless, endless forces, just matter in motion. It's just sort of a huge evolutionary view, a cosmological evolutionary view of things. Even though we're all just a cosmic accident, we can still create our own meaning and our own purpose. Well, that's true, but that's subjective meaning and purpose. When most people talk about meaning and purpose, they're talking about something more objective than that. All right? So it comes down to this. If we are just the result of mindless and blind forces out there, our lives ultimately don't have anything that can be called objective meaning and purpose. And so the idea that that just emerges out of our interaction and collaboration is a contradiction in term. True meaning and purpose has to be something that transcends just something that you and I create. Here's another classic paradox. There are many people who say that the concept of the Trinity, the Father is God, the Son, Jesus is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. Well, if you're saying there's one God and yet those three are God, isn't that a contradiction in terms? Well, a Orthodox Jew would certainly say that about what Christians believe. A Muslim would certainly say that about what Christians believe, and there may be others as well. But it's not a contradiction. It's a paradox, and we can show that very simply. The doctrine of the Trinity basically states not that there is one God and three gods, but there's one God and three persons. In other words, by one God, we're saying God is one in ontology, God is one in essence or substance or being. But God is three in person. So we're differentiating. We're saying that the idea of personhood and essence are two different things. Now, if we were saying that God was one in person, excuse me, that God, let me correct that. If we're saying that God is one in essence and three in essence, then that would be a contradiction. In the same way, if we were saying that God is one in person and three in person, again, that would be a contradiction. But to examine these things, remember, as we've talked about earlier, what we do is we reduce these concepts down to symbols, just like they do in mathematics. So what we're saying here, that since personhood and essence are two different things, we're saying God is one in A and three in B, not God is one in A and three in A. So therefore, it's not a contradiction, it's a paradox. Remember that contradictions are certainly mysterious, and here we want to talk about the similarities between these. There's similarities between all three of these concepts up here, contradiction, paradox, and mystery, but more importantly, there are differences. Contradictions are certainly mysterious. They're certainly unintelligible. They don't make sense. But here's the main point here. They don't make sense because they can never, under any circumstances, be resolved. There can never be any such thing as a round square. Mysteries, on the other hand, and I love mystery novels and mystery movies, and I'm sure you've seen some of those or read some of those as well. Mysteries are also mysterious. They have that in common with contradictions, but they only seem unintelligible. Why do they only seem unintelligible rather than are, as with a contradiction? Because a mystery may be resolved when we get additional information. Isn't that the whole point of a mystery novel or a movie that you watch? You're waiting to read the end. You're building up until the end of the movie or the novel, the book, because you want to know how they're going to resolve that mystery where it finally makes sense. Oh, the butler did it. It was the butler that murdered the main character. It was this that explains how this particular event occurred. We're all waiting for the way the movie wraps up and these kinds of things. So it was a mystery as long as we didn't know the ending, but once we got to the ending and it was revealed, it's no longer mysterious and it's no longer unintelligible because why? It's been resolved. Contradictions, we must remember, are unintelligible by nature. In other words, they don't make sense by nature, by the very definition of it. Think once again, a round square. They'll never, ever make sense no matter what. Mysteries, on the other hand, are only unintelligible, as we've said, because we just don't have sufficient knowledge. We haven't got to the end of the book yet or the end of the movie. We might understand them in the future. It just depends upon whether it's been resolved yet. When we get to the end of the book, we might be able to learn it, or if we get additional information on a particular subject, then we might be able to figure it out so where it makes sense. Mysteries are basic to the scientific method. Think about that. Why do scientists want to do experiments, and why do they come up with theories and hypotheses and things like that? Well, because they're curious. They might be curious about the way the universe works. They might be worried about what something is composed of. Water is composed of two molecules of hydrogen and one molecule of oxygen. How do we know that? Well, because scientists got curious about it and they started examining it. And they discovered what it was made of. It also helps us to discover what's real. Remember, ontology is the study of being. What really is it that makes somebody a human being, for instance? Well, there are characteristics that we all share in common that make us human, as opposed to being a dog or a cat or a bird or a table or a rock. Think about, for instance, gravity. We all agree that gravity exists, but we're still very, very unsure about the nature of gravity. It's still very mysterious. We don't know why gravity exists. We just know that if there's an object that has mass, it's attracted to another object that has mass as well. And this is why the Earth rotates around the sun and the moon rotates around the Earth. And we're talking about things that exist that have weight or mass. Think about the nature of time. It's very mysterious. Um, why does time move in a linear fashion? It goes from earlier to later. Why does time even exist? We know time had a beginning. Even the best science tells us, as well as scripture, that time had a beginning, but we don't really know how it works or why it exists. Think about the nature of light. We know by experiments that scientists have done on light that it's both a wave and a particle at the same time. Now, how can this be? That seems to contradict because a wave is immaterial and a particle is material. How can it be both at the same time? Well, it's just very, very mysterious. It seems to contradict, but it doesn't because obviously light exists. But then think about something else. Light's not the only thing that has a dual nature, has dual natures. For instance, think about the mystery of the incarnation, Jesus, something that people all over the world celebrate at Christmas time. The idea that Jesus is God, but what? He's one person, but he has two natures. One is, as we said, he's divine, he's God, but at some point in history, he became a man. He became a human being. So now Jesus eternally exists as both God and man or humanity. How can something have two natures? Does that contradict? Well, light has two natures, so we know that it's certainly possible for a being to have two natures. So, to review, a mystery can be a mystery to some, but it cannot be a mystery to others at the same time. It's just that those people may have more knowledge about that particular subject than somebody else. Take the topic of electricity. I understand some things about electricity, but I'm certainly not as schooled as somebody who might have advanced degrees in it or even a very experienced electrician. I know that if I turn on a light switch, the light comes on. I know that if I turn it off, the light goes off. I know it works, but I couldn't tell you all the reasons as to why when I flick that switch, the light comes on. Physics. I'm not a physicist. I'm theoretical physics gets into all kinds of very, very heady subject matter. If you watch The Big Bang Theory and you watch them talk about physics on that comedy on CBS, you know that physics is very complicated. But some people understand it more so than others. Now, I do have degrees in music, so I may understand some things about music that you don't. Some things about music may be mysteries to you, but they may not necessarily be mysteries to me. It doesn't mean I'm smarter than you. It just means I've had the opportunity to study and get some education in that area that maybe you haven't had yet. For instance, if I ask you what notes compose a C major seventh chord, I dare say that most of you listening to this today, you don't know the answer to that. But I can easily tell you the answer to that. A C major seventh chord is composed of the notes C, E, G, and B. And I can play them on a piano and I can play the notes individually on other instruments, and that's just the notes that compose a C major seventh chord. There's mysteries in the Bible. In fact, if you look at the book of Ephesians, Paul, the Apostle Paul, continually talks about this mystery that God has hidden or veiled from people previously, but he's revealed it in the first century. And we should all be glad about that because we know that once the mystery revealed, it was the idea that it was always God's plan for Gentiles to be included in his people as well as Jews. And since most of us probably listening to this are Gentiles, we're really glad about that. God has included us, but we didn't know that until the mystery was revealed. So, one thing that we can say with certainty is that mysteries are possible. We may just lack the information that we need to make them uh, intelligible so that it makes sense. But contradictions are always impossible. They will never, ever make sense. That concludes our Lecture 6. We'll see you again next time with Lecture 7.